We have a production setup network that crosses 3 continents. We produce 3 different types of cellulose fibers. One is viscose, the other one is modal, and we also produce our tensile lyocell fibers. So everything we do starts from the forest, from the wood. We source wood, we source wood pulp, we produce it into a pulp, we convert it into different types of fibers, and these fibers go into different applications. We have 2 business areas. One is non-woven business, where we supply to different hygiene products, and we have our textile business, where we work with different, with the supply chain around the world to supply different areas of textile applications. You can go to the next slide, please. Where are we in the market? So we are part of the cellulose fiber family. So our fibers shared many similarities with natural cellulose fibers, so as, for example, cotton. We have 3 generations, what we call generations of wood-based cellulose fibers. We started with viscose, and we have also in our production portfolio modal fibers, tensile modal fibers, and also tensile lyocell fibers. What they have in common is they have the same raw material. All of them are made from wood. They have the same molecular structure, so they're all cellulose fibers, but what makes them different from each other is the production process. All of them have different production processes that lead to different and distinct fiber characteristics, which makes them useful in many different textile applications and very different characteristics. So you'll find great wood-based cellulose fiber for almost any application in textiles. We are, as part of the fiber industry in total, we are in a market that is roughly 6% of the entire fiber production globally, next to synthetic fibers, of course, which are the biggest share, and cotton with the second biggest share. So we have seen a lot of growth in our industry in the recent past, and we do see a lot of growth also in the future due to certain fiber characteristic, environmental parameters, and so on, which I will touch a bit at the end of the presentation. Can go to the next slide, please. Where will you find us? Where can you use us? We have been developing our 2 ingredient brands for the textile business. So we have our Tensile brand, our Ecovero brand, which we started because we saw an increasing need also from end consumers to understand raw material that they have in the products, the end products they buy. We see an increasing need for that, on the one hand, to understand how does it impact them, how does it impact their comfort in wearing and using these products, but on the other hand, also to understand where do the raw materials come from, what's their impact on the environment. So we've been developing these ingredient brands over the last few years, and you will find those brands and the products related to them in many different apparel segments. We also have a lot of activity in home textiles. You will find them in many different products, and with meanwhile millions of licensed branded products every month in our markets globally. Next slide, please. Yeah, as a producer, of course, we have also a lot of responsibility in making sure that our environmental footprint is minimal. That starts with wood sourcing. So all of the wood and the pulp that we source is from certified sustainable sources only. We have our own pulp production here in Austria. We also have one investment that we're doing at the moment to have more control over our wood and pulp sourcing. So we're really sensitive about what goes into our production. This also extends, of course, into the production itself. So also there we make sure that we have a minimal footprint. We have confirmed science-based target to also reduce our CO2 footprint over the next years and decades. We have a lot of products and materials that we use. A lot of the wood we use, we don't only use for fibers. So we try to use really every part of the raw material that we use for different products and side products and co-products to keep our footprint very low. We have a lot of investments in environmental technology, wastewater treatment, any kind of sustainable technology at all our production sites globally. We also do a lot of activities around transparency and partnerships. So we have different technologies that we use, digital technologies on the one hand, but also product technologies, which allows us to make it really open and transparent for everyone who gets in touch with our fibers to understand where that product comes from, and also to ensure that it's a genuine product where they know the origin. And of course, we also drive a lot of innovations in the sustainability area. We have our R&D center here in Lansing, where we, on the one hand, work on sustainable product innovations, but we also continuously work with our production processes to make them minimum impact. Next slide, please. How do we work with brands? We have global footprints. You see a little bit of that on the left. We are active on the one hand in retail consumption markets like the US, like in Europe, in all major markets, and work with brands and retail there, but we're also active in all major production hubs from China to India to all Southeast Asian markets where we are active. So together with this network of people in Lansing and also our supply chain network, we work with brands on everything related to wood-based cellulose fibers. So that can be the start of a new product, the identification of a new field for our products in that brand's portfolio. That can also relate to setting up supply chains for brands. That also often relates to addressing certain challenges in sourcing. So that's a bit the way we work with our brands and supply chain. And be good also to share some of the things that we could help you with at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So the session today is about recent market developments. It's a very turbulent time for us, I think for everyone in the industry. So I start this with one chart, which comes on the next slide. If you jump to that, please, Shannon. So what you see here is a chart of retail traffic in the early months of 2020. I'm sure most of you or all of you have seen a picture like this or a similar picture, and we've all experienced that in one way or another as individuals, also as professionals. It was a very, very tough time as a raw material producer as well. Of course, we're all part of a very intricate system, very globally connected, fragmented industry, which if it's exposed to a shock or demand shock like this, of course, has massive repercussions on the raw material industry as well. The reason I start with this chart is because if we look at the market today, the raw material market today, many of the developments we see really originate in this early phase of the COVID pandemic. So this more or less stop of the industry had big impacts on the raw material side as well. So I think I'm sure all of us on that call, myself, my colleagues, remember very well how that was at that time. So also our sales almost came to a halt. We had 60, 70, 80% less monthly sales than in a usual period. We didn't get a lot of interest in our products. We had stocks piling up at our production factories. We never saw such high inventory levels also as a company ever in the past, really. So it has dramatic impacts also on our situation and all raw material producers, economic health, but also, of course, we see a lot of these impacts now in the market today. If you can jump to the next slide, please. What happened to raw material prices? So what you see here is a bit the development of different key textile fibers since the beginning of 2018. So this shows a weekly development. What you see here is that on the one hand, there was already a long downward trend for many raw materials before the COVID pandemic. So that started already in 2018, especially for viscose. Viscose industry lost roughly 40% of the price level versus 2018 already before the crisis. And what happened then during the crisis is that this real stop of demand brought most of the textile raw material prices to all-time lows. So we've never seen this in the viscose industry since there are records really of price development. So it was really a dramatic development for us. It was also dramatic development for most other textile raw materials. You can jump to the next slide, please. What I often do which is very interesting nowadays, is to jump back in time and look a bit at the newspaper, magazine articles that we've seen in the middle of the crisis. So what I posted here is a Vogue business article from the end of March, which discusses a bit what's the impact of COVID-19 on the industry, what's the impact on sustainability in particular. And that's something that we as a company, when there was not a lot of business, we had a lot of discussions internally. What does it really mean? And we found that there are two groups of companies, brands, supply chain. One group saying it's survival first and sustainability second, and then there is another group saying that there is no survival without sustainability. So at that time, it was really hard to understand and read the market. What would that mean, especially for us as a company whose entire business model is built around sustainability? It's very hard because, of course, we did a lot of investments, a lot of preparations, a lot of product launches, which then suddenly came to a stop. So that's a bit the situation back then. It's always interesting now to jump back in time and see a bit what the market situation was back then. So that has changed a lot, which you will see on the next couple of pages. If you can jump the next slide, please. What happened then in the rest of the year is that, of course, all the forecasts, different analysts, all of us have followed them. They were, of course, very negative in some cases, but they were quickly changed, these forecasts. So in the rest of the year, the recovery was relatively faster than many analysts expected, especially in China, where we also have a lot of activities. The recovery was much faster in other regions. So already in the third calendar quarter of last year, we are already in growth territory in China. Some other regions, of course, especially Europe, the US as well, are lagging a bit behind, but also here we've seen a faster recovery than many analysts expected at that time. Next slide, please. So also, if we look at what do different analysts think about the future, we see that many have expectations that say that 21 could be somewhat similar to the retail business in 2019. We have some cases where the forecasts are even better than 2019. So overall, the situation has improved. It has changed. The forecasts are good. The expectations are very high. Now, if we look at the next slide, we will see what that meant for raw material markets. So what you see here on the right side of this chart is the same raw materials or same price index that you've seen on the earlier page. So we see here in green the viscose prices, in blue cotton Far East index, and in black polyester staple fiber for China. So you see here from starting sometime in the middle or the second half of last year, we see a significant recovery in all raw material prices. So you see a similar development for both cotton, for viscose, and also for polyester. It's an unprecedented recovery almost. So if you look at cotton prices, for example, so I'm not the cotton expert, but if you go back in time, if you look at the data for the last 20 years, I did that before this call, you really see that this has never happened in that extreme way. So we have now, for cotton alone, we have 10 consecutive months of growth of that index, and this hasn't happened for the last 20 years. And also the extent of this price increase is very unusual. There were only very few instances in the past where we've seen such a recovery in such a short period of time. And that development is also there for viscose prices. So for viscose prices, from a really all-time low in the middle of this year to a price level that we've seen in the beginning of 2018 is something that also has never happened over the past. Why? What is our explanation? Why did that happen? On the one hand, the demand has come back relatively fast from retail. We always have to consider a time lag as a raw material producer. So any fiber that we sell at the moment will reach retail in months from now. So we can understand a bit what are the expectations at the moment. And from what we see, the expectations are high, especially for wood-based cellulose fibers. There are many of our, or basically most or all of our fibers are back to pre-crisis levels. So we have recovered also our sales. What do we also see? We see low fiber inventories of fiber producers in the middle of the crisis, especially first half of last year. We have seen extremely high inventory levels of fiber at fiber producers. Now this has come down drastically over the past few weeks and months. We're now at relatively normal levels. The same is also true for yarn inventories. Also yarn inventories saw extremely high values in the beginning of the crisis. Now they are back to a normal, or in some cases even below normal level. What else? We also see increases of different other raw material costs. So if you look at similar curves for our own raw materials, so especially dissolving wood pulp, Also there, we've seen significant increases in just a matter of a few weeks. So also production gets more and more expensive at the moment. We also impacted, of course, by the development of other fibers. So you see also other raw materials moving up, and whenever we see that gap, for example, between cotton and viscose increasing, that very often drives viscose prices upwards. What we also see in the market is there is a lot of liquidity, there's a lot of cheap money to replenish inventories. So the prices, of course, were at all-time lows. It's many might consider that as a chance to buy cheap raw materials, and of course that also drives prices upwards if there's a lot of money available in the market to do that. What is also impacting us, I think it's impacting everyone here, are freight costs. So for any deliveries from the east to the west, which is very usual also for us in the fiber business, transportation costs have increased dramatically. What does that mean? It means that the price levels of fibers, they vary very much between different markets. So what you see here is always the Chinese, for viscose, the Chinese price development, but the development can be very different in other regions of the world. That's true for Europe. That's also true for North America, for South America. Whenever there is an import from China, in many cases we have 4, 5, 6 times the transportation costs that we had before the crisis, and years before the crisis. So that's a bit how we look at the recent situation. There are, of course, many factors that support these developments. On the one hand, demand is very strong. We see especially good demand for sustainable viscose fibers, not just viscose fibers, but any type of sustainable fibers. So we hear and see and read a lot of reports on organic cotton, on different specialty fibers, which are very short in supply as well. We also, to some degree, believe that there can be a shift between raw materials. So we see a lot of additional demand also for the viscose industry, which can, of course, also come from other markets. And if you look at the future or the near future, there are many factors which make that market very uncertain and volatile. Of course, none of us really knows how retail demand will unfold. We're still faced with many lockdowns in different regions, especially if we look at Europe. There are lockdowns in several countries. Retail is definitely not back to normal, but expectations are very high. How these expectations will unfold, we will see that. But of course, there can also be an impact on unsold goods, on increased inventories, which will then affect future sourcing periods. So this is one of the uncertainty factors. Another thing is, of course, also how will the consumption in general, how will the COVID pandemic develop further? Will it impact retail consumption further, or will that normalize soon? Freight costs, of course, I mentioned that earlier, is still one of the biggest challenges we face on the raw material side. So also there, we haven't really seen an improvement over the last few weeks, so that can still be a big challenge in the coming weeks. Next slide, please. How do we look into the future? If you look at our fiber portfolio, we have reason to believe, or reason to be quite confident. There are a number of reasons why. Number one are the properties of the fibers as such. So we have a fiber portfolio in wood-based cellulose fibers, which is very versatile. You can use them in many different products, in 100% products with that fiber, in blends with other cellulose fibers, in blends with synthetic fibers. So it's a very versatile fiber with very good characteristics. They're very breathable. They have a good moisture management, so they are good in any weather conditions. They have a lot of properties which lead us to believe that there will be some growth potential in these fibers, especially for lyocell fibers. Another reason is, of course, the environmental aspect. So we have a lot of parameters, a lot of fiber parameters, or a lot of reasons why the environmental impact of wood-based cellulose fibers is good, is better than with other fibers. So we have, of course, on the one hand, we deal with wood as a renewable resource. There's not a lot of use of pesticides. There is less water use. It's a clean process, especially if we look at our tensile lyocell. We have a closed loop production process. We have biodegradable products, compostable products. There are no microplastics, so the environmental parameters are very strong for continuous growth. And then, last but not least, supply. Of course, if it's a manufactured product, there is no relation to the climate or to weather conditions. Usually, there is also no competition for arable land with other food crops. So it's a product where demand and supply, or where supply is usually more stable. It's also a smaller and more transparent producer base, so it's easier to really get in touch with the producer of that product. So these are some of the factors why we think that the future will be strong for wood-based cellulose fibers in general, and especially for lyocell fibers within that portfolio. Yeah, and that's already it from my side. So I'm looking forward to a good discussion.
All right. Thank you, Johannes. Very, very good job of illustrating really exactly what we've been through since last March in the yarn and fiber industry. Your information about the retail situation, which is really drives the Lenzing business, and it drives Unify's Reprieve business today. We all had to experience that significant decline in sales, but at the same time, depending on where you are and what business you're in, we did discover some emerging new opportunities, particularly in the United States. We had an opportunity to participate in the PPE business, which we typically was not a very big part of our business. It didn't make up for the decline that we saw on the apparel side. But at the end of the day, it did help us in running some of our assets and capacities. And today it's become a standard part of our business. The demand is not quite as high as it was in the height of the quarantine back in March through May or June. But it is something else, somewhat of a positive that came out of it from a business standpoint. Beyond that, I think you've done a great job also illustrating kind of the decline, and now on the backside, the rise in raw material costs associated with the various types of fibers in the industry today. We saw a significant decline in raw material cost as demand dropped off. But as you clearly illustrated, the recovery is definitely coming in process, coming at us a little bit quicker than we thought. And it is certainly driving increased costs, particularly in our business on the synthetic side that we're seeing today in terms of polyester, nylon, and spandex. There are some significant price increases that we're seeing in the market today. And this demand, as companies continue to recover, is coming at us from a lot of it unforecasted. So yes, we're in line with you as far as what the inventories look like in some cases where we're struggling to get back up to where we were pre-pandemic. So with that being said, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions in the Q&A. And so again, I thank you for a very good illustration of where the market has gone at the beginning of the pandemic, now today in the recovery mode. But a little bit about Unify for those of you who are not familiar with Unify. We'll go to the next slide, Shannon. Unify is a public company under the symbol UFI in the New York Stock Exchange. We're a little bit over a $600 million company. We are a global company with over 2,600 employees. We are known for manufacturing, research and development, and product innovation. And later this spring, we will be celebrating our 50th year of manufacturing at Unify. Next slide. Similar to some of the product offerings that Lenzing has, our most popular product is our Reprieve product, which is our brand for recycled polyester and nylon. Reprieve is a high-quality performance fiber made from recycled materials. And we are fortunate that many of the most recognized global brands in the world are using Reprieve in a lot of their products. And so we will continue to advance the development of recycled polyester and nylon materials. And we're certainly excited that in our Reprieve journey, we've gotten our Reprieve products to a place that they are considered to be a drop-in replacement for virgin polyester and virgin nylon products. Next slide. What's important about Reprieve is the process. And from a polyester standpoint, that process starts with you and me. When we choose to put our bottles in other PET waste materials in a recycling container, that is where the process starts. That is what is most important. And that is where we can start to offset the need for natural resources. In the process, once we are able to receive those post-consumer materials, we're going to chop them up and clean them to produce flake. And from there, the flake will be converted to polymer, and the polymer will be extruded into continuous filament or staple fiber. Next slide. But really what's most important in the world of recycled material is transparent, traceable, and certified product. And for us at Unify and Reprieve, we started what we call the U-Trust verification system, which includes our fiber print technology many years ago. And to go along with that, certainly third-party certifications such as Global Recycle Standard or GRS, scientific certification systems, SES, and then the Okiatech certifications for health and safety all coincide and come with the U-Trust verification process. And so at the end of the day, it's really important for our customers, for the brands and retailers, and the supply chain in general to know exactly where your product came from and to be guaranteed that it is made from 100% recycled content. And so with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon, and we can begin the Q&A session with myself, Johannes, and the rest of the group.
Thank you very much, Jay and Johannes, for your presentations. We're going to do a panel discussion, and from there we'll open up the floor to our audience questions. So if you have any questions for our speakers, we definitely encourage you to begin submitting those. And our first question, and this is something you both touched on a little bit in your presentations, but if you're able to elaborate more, how has COVID affected your business, and how has the pandemic affected your supply chain? Yeah. And Johannes, if we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think Jay already said a couple of comments. I think both of our companies tried to make the best out of it. What we also did is we have two business fields. One is textile, the other one is non-woven, and especially the non-woven business is going into different hygiene products from wet wipes to other personal hygiene products. So this was a business that was very strong during the pandemic. I think all of us remember, the news articles about toilet paper, which you cannot find in supermarkets and so on, was very similar for different hygiene products as well. So that helped us, of course. Also, we went a bit into the personal protective equipment market ourselves. So we opened a face mask production here in Austria with millions of capacity every month. So we also do normal face masks, also FFP2 or similar to N95 masks in the US. So we've tried our best to deal with the situation. But of course, on the textile side, it was very, very severe. Yeah. And I also have I mentioned this, I look at old articles. So I also have a Financial Times articles. It's exactly 1 year old, 24th of February last year. And if you read this, it's hard, it's good, interesting sometimes to go back and really see how massive that impact was on our economy, on our personal lives. This article mentions Italy, for example, which was very surprised by 152 COVID positive cases. And I think looking at that number now is, it's really incredible how that situation developed. But I think the company went through this crisis relatively well, and now we're on a good track. It's hard to go through this crisis. It's very unpredictable for us as well, but somehow we've managed our way, and we hope that it stabilizes in the near future.
Yeah, I would say the same from my perspective and the Unify perspective. Obviously, we had some real challenges when 60% of our sales kind of just disappeared as the world stopped March, April, May of last year. And as I mentioned earlier, there were some opportunities that came out of that in terms of some new business, emerging business with PPE. But I would say on a positive note, it did force us to kind of focus on some things that we always talk about trying to improve, but most companies struggle with it. So we were able to really focus on things such as inventory and managing different items in different businesses that in a pre-pandemic world, we were moving so fast, we really weren't focused on some of these initiatives that would ultimately improve our business, improve cash flow, improve all the things that normally come with that. And so in another light, that did help us improve some different areas within the company. But just like most companies, we had to make some tough decisions along the way in an effort to just cope with the situation. Again, as the world kind of stopped for a couple of months, but certainly try to keep a positive attitude during the whole process and keep our employees motivated, and then continue to just learn how to work in a virtual world as opposed to the physical world. And when many of us were used to traveling and visiting customers as we had for many, many years.
Thank you both. Our next question, can you talk about the importance of traceability and how your company is committed to it? Jay, why don't we start with you this time?
Well, I mean, it's kind of the foundation of Reprieve. That is, as we have developed Reprieve and Reprieve has evolved, it started with traceability because in the synthetic world, particularly PET is PET no matter how you get there. And for us, it really was important that we could provide our customers, brands and retailers, and the supply chain in general a way to know that if they were specifying Reprieve, that we had a way to validate that it actually made it into the finished product. And so, and certainly, as sustainability and the environment and recycled materials have become more and more popular. This has become very evident that it is becoming more of the standard that our products and our supply chain have to be traceable and certified.
Yeah, I agree absolutely with you, Jay. I think the lack of transparency is one of the key problems that we see at the moment. If in a phase like this, if you don't know where your product comes from, you will face much more challenges than a company that knows very well what the supply chain is from the fiber, through the different production stages to the end product. So that is something that we've also been driving for a long time, long before the crisis, but where we see a lot of new interest in solutions like this. We have a blockchain technology partner that we work with, for example, which visualizes where does the product come from the fiber, which different steps did it went to, what locations did it go to, and how did it end up at the retailer or at the brand. If we had something like this already years ago, then restarting after this shutdown would have been much easier, I think, for many players, including ourselves. If you know where the product comes from, it's easier to work with these partners on, in an unstable and volatile market like this. So the importance is massive for us, of course. Yeah.
Thank you both. And one final question before we open it up to our audience members. What recommendations do you have for brands who want to source sustainable materials? Johannes, we'll begin with you.
Yeah, what we usually recommend to brands is three things. Number one, of course, you have to choose the right product. You have to choose a product that fits to your audience, to your consumers, to your brands. Why? Because in many cases it will be a slightly more costly product. So of course you would want your customers to understand the product, to understand the value of the product, to understand the difference of that raw material to any other raw material. So choosing the right product, I think, is really the first step. And then, of course, what we also recommend is, especially in times like this, the timeline of converting to sustainable materials needs to match the timeline of supply availability of these materials. If you look at cotton, for example, at organic cotton as an extreme case, there is no way that someone can double their sourcing of organic cotton within the matter of weeks. It's impossible. It's simply not there. It's the same for other raw materials as well. I think we all are very aggressive and optimistic in our increase of production, but it's not the push of a button to have a sustainable product. It requires lead times, it requires investments, it requires changes in raw material sourcing, even changes in organization setup. So it's not something that is simply there. It requires a lead time. If you have chosen the product that you want, you have to think about how does that match with availability. And for that, it's really important to get in touch with the producers directly, understand their roadmap, understand their constraints, and together work on a solution that works for all parties. And then I think one thing, and that relates back to your question on traceability, it's critical to make sure that the product is really a genuine product. The product that you buy is actually the product that you pay for. If there is a shortage in the market, there is always a risk that you don't get the product you actually want and you actually paid for. So having a product that allows you to verify that with a clear and audited certification process is critical at these times. So that's usually the few recommendations we give to brands.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that, and I would say that really at the end of the day, sustainability is a journey, and alongside with that, it's an investment. It is not something that can that's easily done overnight, as Johannes has alluded to for a lot of different reasons. But at the end of the day, it's a journey, it's an investment, and it's a mindset. To have a sustainable mindset, then you're thinking about all those things that go into your product, and you're thinking about the attributes that come out of your product. But what's most important from a sustainability standpoint is you have to know where your product is coming from, and how it was made, in that transparency that goes with that. The biggest challenge that we run into with brands and retailers is, particularly from a Reprieve standpoint, and I'm sure Lenzing has the same challenge, is everyone wants the most sustainable, traceable products that they can get, but they want it for the same price and for no premium compared to generic product. And so much more goes into making sustainable product than the generic or the virgin materials. And so we're not to a point where sustainability does not come with a premium, and certainly that premium has been reduced over the years, and certainly it'll continue to be reduced as more and more of the world demand shifts from and particularly in the synthetic business, from a virgin material to a recycled material.
Great, thank you very much. And we're now going to turn it over to our audience. We have lots of questions to get through, so we'll do our best to do that. Our first question, Jay, I believe this is for you. What % of increased recycled polyester are you seeing over the last few years, and how do you see the next 3 to 5 years?
So we're definitely seeing an increase in demand for recycled polyester. At Unify, Reprieve represents about 35% of our total sales, and we see that continuing to increase over the next 3 to 5 years as more and more brands are turning to recycled material. And as both Johannes and I said, a lot of these brands are making these decisions and without forecasting the decisions, and so sometimes that can create a challenge with supply. But in general, it's not about right now. It's not about availability, because this is still an emerging trend, and we're seeing more and more usage and demand. But down the road, we continue to see more conversions to virgin. One big question comes to us all the time is, will there be enough bottles? And in the short term, the answer is there's no issue with the bottle supply chain. But as recycling rates and recycling awareness and demand continues to increase over the next 3, 5, 10 years, certainly that material will be more utilized than it is today. So we think it's going to continue to be a mega trend for quite some time.
Great, thank you. And that perfectly goes into our next question. If you both could speak on what are the biggest challenges you face in terms of input supply, and what is the industry doing to address these challenges?
You want to go first?
Well, I'll tell you from a recycling standpoint, particularly here in the United States, the recycling rate is still under 30%. And we know that in Europe and in Asia, it is much higher than it is here. So as that infrastructure, that awareness evolves, so that we can capture more material here in the United States, that's gonna create a lot of opportunity as more and more industries are requiring a recycled input. So that's a big opportunity for us here in the United States, is to increase the recycling rates.
Yeah, and for us, it's I mean, our main raw material is wood or wood pulp. So wherever we have the control over the supply, we are doing well. But of course, whenever you depend on other companies, other raw material suppliers, especially in an industry which has huge challenges related to freight availability and freight costs and so on, that can create challenges at the moment. As a company, we're doing good, I would say, but it just shows again how important the access to raw material is also for companies like us. And I believe it's the same also for Unify and Reprieve. Access to the raw material is really one key factor that ensures business stability. So we continuously try to get access to these raw materials, have control over these raw materials to avoid any negative impact on our business. So at the moment we are doing good, but we don't know what surprises we might be seeing in the future. Company that purely depends on raw material where they don't have control on can of course run into big challenges at the moment.
Great, thank you. And our next question, what is the % cost differential between virgin and recycled yarns for apparel?
Well, I think on a global basis today, even though that premium continues to come down, on a global basis, is still probably a 25 to 30% premium over virgin. But obviously that depends on where you are in the world as to what that premium can be. Certainly in Asia, particularly in China, that premium can be much larger, considering that the virgin material there is the lowest cost virgin material in the world. But still, I believe on a global basis, the standard premium that's in the market is about a 25-30% premium over virgin.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just also because we also have recycled materials that we use. So we have our Refibra technology where we also use textile waste in our raw material stream. So there, it's an investment we make into the future. We can by far not recover the additional costs. If you include all investments, R&D costs, raw material sourcing, additional production steps, and so on, it's impossible to recover all of these costs. Of course, we'd like to recover some of it. We do that also in a long-term interest to use more recycled materials ourselves in our raw material sourcing. But of course, costs can be slightly higher, but they are, I would say, manageable if you have close relations to your suppliers and you make sure that the margin that are put on every step in the supply chain are not so dramatic that you cannot afford the product at the end of the day. So I think the closer you work with producers and the closer your relations with the supply chain, the more manageable it gets. But we see it clearly as a future for us as a company as well. So our aspiration is to see also recycled material as something next to virgin wood as a raw material, but as a normal raw material. That's a bit our aspiration for the mid and long term.
Great, thank you so much. And for both of you, our next question, do you have an idea of how much of the increase in fiber prices will be transmitted to garment prices in the current situation?
Well, I think it's just depends on the timing and the seasonality. Obviously, we're coming to the end of one season here in the March-April timeframe. But I think we're going to continue to see in the short term some increases as Johannes illustrated in his graph, particularly from a synthetic standpoint. We're also seeing that graph also was showing some cotton increases as well. And so ultimately it just comes down to the supply chain and those fabric producers and the garment producers and the different pricing scenarios that they have in place with different brands. But there's no doubt about it. It will have an impact, but it's not something that is uncommon to the apparel industry as the raw material market kind of fluctuates at different times over the years.
Yeah, I agree. Undoubtedly, it will have an impact. I mean, what we also have to consider for many raw materials, if you look at the beginning or the peak of the pandemic, March, April, May, a lot of the supply chain were also in severe financial troubles. All of them tried to get their inventories down. In many cases, yarn prices were reduced, even though the raw materials prices were not reduced. So many producers went really to a very low level also of yarn prices. Now they're moving out of this, so the perceived increase might be even a bit higher than the increase in fiber prices. So we do definitely see that translated to the yarn prices as well. Yeah, that's what we see. How much of that is really recovered or how much of that increase is really borne by the supply chain, we will have to see. But in addition to the chart that I showed earlier, we also face with significant increases in freight costs on any stage of the product. So also that will impact, of course, the garment prices. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. Nobody in the industry can take these additional costs on his own.
Great, thank you. Our next question for each of you: can products made from recycled fibers be physically distinguished from those made from virgin fiber? What tools are available to regulators to enforce recycled content?
Well, there's depending on the yarn or fiber manufacturer, there's a lot of different technology that's being utilized today. As I mentioned, Unify has the U-Trust verification system in our fiber print technology. There's some other technologies in the synthetic world that are being introduced. But again, at the end of the day, it really depends on your supply chain and your suppliers that you're working with as to the level of trust and transparency that you have there. It's going to become more and more of a requirement to have a traceable, transparent product, and that's really where I think the technology will go. As certainly us at Unify will look at different levels and different technologies that will propel us into the future, that will provide even higher level of trust, transparency, and traceability.
Yeah, for us, for our recycled products, the fibers where we use recycled materials, it's the same product as the virgin materials. So you can use it in absolutely the same way as a normal product. We make sure that that's possible. It can be separated from a non-recycled products, also thanks to our fiber identification technology, where we can understand, is that really a recycled product or not? So cheating in a way is not really possible with these products. From a regulator standpoint, yeah, it depends really from market to market. There are many countries where there is not a good system in place to collect waste fabrics, so the fabrics that we use in our waste in our raw material streams. Many countries, especially if we look at Europe, Austria, for example, we have very well developed collection systems. So I think the first step is to really ensure that the waste streams are managed very well. So that means that what we don't want to do, for example, as a company, we don't want to use fabrics or garments that can be used in a more higher value way. So whenever a garment can still be worn by someone or has a second-hand use or something like this, we don't want to have these materials. We only want to have materials which really are torn apart, cannot be used any longer, and so on. So I think having the right regulations to ensure that the waste management for textiles is improved is the first important step. From a technological standpoint, it's hard to really enforce that by regulatory means, because the technology is well developed. If you look at our technology, but of course it's a journey. It's a journey. We use 30% of waste products in our Refibra technology. Of course, we increase it over time, but it's hard to do that faster than we already do that. So any regulation would be good to have for waste management system, also to manage in the long run the use of recycled materials. But it's a journey. It will take time to really do that from a technological standpoint.
Thank you both. And we have time for a couple more questions. Our next question, we have a few for Unify. How much of your products are manufactured in the US, and does Unify supply globally?
Well, we do have a global supply chain where our heaviest and largest asset base is here in the United States and Central America. But we also make product in South America, in Colombia and Brazil. But the fastest growing segment for Unify has been our Asia business. And certainly that is driven by the demand for sustainable products. In Asia, we're primarily what we call a value-added producer, and we don't really participate or make many virgin material based materials, mostly reprieve-based materials. And so we're seeing a significant increase in our Asia business. But at the same time, we are definitely seeing, particularly in Central America, the trend and the transition from from virgin yarns to utilizing more recycled yarns, really over the last 3 years. And so, as both Johannes and I have been saying, sustainability movement is definitely happening. And in light of the pandemic, we're seeing more and more brands really sticking to their sustainability claims. And as most of you know, most of the world's leading brands have put out sustainability goals between now, 2025, and 2030. And so I do think during this pandemic and the quarantine, a lot of these brands stayed focused on their sustainability initiatives. And we're starting to see, as we recover and come out of the other side of the pandemic, we're definitely seeing an increase in demand for recycled, eco-friendly material.
Great, thank you. And we have time. We'll take 2 more questions. For both of you, many brands want to be able to track the supply chain to the fiber level. Are you seeing more requests from your customers to provide affidavits and documentation to brands and retailers?
Yeah, definitely. As I said earlier, also we collaborate with one company called Textile Genesis, which provides a blockchain platform to trace products from the production stage of the fiber until the end use in retail. So we've been doing this for a couple of years now. The interest was also good in the past, but we definitely see much more interest at the moment. We see that coming from brands who we want to work with brands, we want to give them a promise, but it's hard to do so if we don't know the supply chain that is between us and the brands. If we don't know that, it's virtually impossible to do so. So the more you understand about that, and the technology is out there, it's simply about onboarding everyone and making it work. But the technology is there. We definitely see much more interest. We'll also reach out to many brands also to work on that in the next couple of weeks and months. So I think definitely there is much more interest at the moment.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is we've definitely seen an emergence of the Global Recycle Standard, GRS certifications. A lot of brands are asking for that, but that's also a process where everyone in the supply chain has to be GRS certified, and there is a chain of custody that takes place. So we're definitely seeing a trend for a lot of brands and retailers to require that, in addition to the different traceable technologies that Unify and Lenzing both offer.
Thank you very much. And our final question, Are either of your companies working toward Cradle to Cradle certified or looking to circular certifications?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone in the recycled and sustainability business is taking a look at that, particularly from a Unify standpoint in synthetics. We launched what we call a textile take back several years ago, but obviously that technology and the demand around recycling fabrics and recycling garments is definitely increasing. But we're at the beginning stage of that. There's a lot to learn about that process, particularly mechanical recycling versus chemical or molecular recycling. But it is up and coming, and it is something that we will be focused on in the future. We are working with a lot of brands and retailers that will design for recyclability in terms of the way they construct their garments. For us, with synthetic material, buttons, zippers, all made of PET, making sure that whole garment qualifies for recycling from a synthetic standpoint.
Yeah, and I would also echo what Jay said. So definitely we are looking into that. We already collaborate with a lot of brands to include or to see how we can include their own waste out of their own supply chains in our recycling process to include their waste materials in a virgin product. So definitely we're looking into that. But yeah, as Jay said, it's a lot about technology. It's about understanding different product composition. What is the right product that you can include in different waste streams and different recycled technologies? So there's a lot of research that's going on at the moment at Lansing as well to that direction.
Great. And on that note, we are going to conclude our webinar. I want to thank Jay and Johannes for joining us today, sharing all of your expertise and such an engaging conversation as well. So thank you both so much. I also want to thank our audience members for joining us today. A quick reminder that you will receive a follow-up email later today with a copy of the slide deck and a recording of today's session. If we weren't able to get to your question today, we will follow up on that. So thank you again for joining us. You can always reach out to USFIA with any additional questions at info@usfashionindustry.com. Thanks for joining us. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Also from our side. Thank you.